I've heard things like what you just said with, people are concerned. What is it again? Malingering. People are concerned that people are malingering. Here's the deal. So what? So what, military leaders? Think about this for a second. Think about this. If you radically support them, now I'm not talking about just giving them whatever they want. I'm not talking about, oh yeah, here's some candy canes and you go play Candyland. No, you support them. You get them connected to science-based resources that are aimed at healing the brain. You're going to have a few people sneak through the cracks that are just being lazy. My guess is the majority are actually having things going on, and the rest, the morale in your unit is going to go through the roof.
Welcome to Your Story Doesn't End Here, the mental health podcast of military and veterans who refuse to be silenced. I'm your host, Rachel, and my mission with this podcast is to be a voice for those who don't have a voice, bring awareness to mental health issues, provide value and solutions, and to change the culture when it comes to mental health within the DoD organizations. Hey everyone, and thank you so much for coming back for another episode of Your Story Doesn't End Here. Today's guest is Chris Littrell, who is a retired law enforcement leader from Washington State. With almost 25 years of public service, he had the opportunity to serve as an Air Force Security Forces sergeant, patrol officer, gang detective, child crime detective, CISM peer support group counselor, SWAT member, school resource officer, patrol sergeant, detective sergeant, and community services sergeant. Chris is a survivor of job-related PTSD. He is a leadership instructor for the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission. Chris is the owner of Gravity Consulting and Training LLC and teaches leadership, emotional intelligence, and communication skills. He and his wife also co-host the Gravity podcast with the mission of captivating audiences with perspective and support. Chris, thank you so much for being on the show today.
You're welcome, Rachel. Thanks for having me on the show.
Of course. So before I pass it off to you to share your story, I just want to get a vibe for how you're feeling today. So if there is one word or a few words that you could use to describe how you are coming into this episode today and how you're feeling, how would you describe that?
Yeah. One word is sore. And I was sharing with you before we hit record that I knocked a rib out of place and it's still out, but that's all right. We're going to get that fixed later. And optimistic. Sore and optimistic.
Two almost completely different ends of the spectrum.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Such is life, right? Well, thank you so much for sharing. And I'm going to pass it off to you to share with the listeners.
Yeah. So, yeah, again, for the listeners, thank you so much, Rachel. So I was Air Force 6 years. I joined the Air Force really because my brother joined before me, and I was working at a grocery store as a young adult. Had just gotten married at the age of 19 to my high school sweetheart, and I was kind of like, what am I doing with my life? I mean, I was only 19, so I mean, I didn't have to have it all figured out. But I dressed up in my brother's Air Force uniform for Halloween at the grocery store I worked at, and it planted this seed. Like I felt better, like just wearing his BDUs, right? I felt better that day, I remember. And shortly after that, we saw a recruiter on base or on base on the college campus where my wife and I were going to school. And I asked my wife, I'm like, hey, what do you think about me joining the military? And she's like, if you want to do it, babe, let's do it. And like I was blown away. Like, we brand new married. We'd been married for like 2 months at this point. And this woman is telling me, I'll follow you into this adventure if that's what you want to do, babe. And and really that has kind of painted the story. It hasn't always been her following me. Sometimes I'm following her, but just this, hey, we're in this story together, so let's go and write it. So I joined the Air Force. Really enjoyed my Air Force time. I mean, I certainly didn't enjoy every aspect of it. I was in Korea for a year away from my family because it was unaccompanied, but obviously built some really great relationships with the men and women I was serving with there. And then I went to Iraq a short time after that for 6 months. But I was in a pretty peaceful area of Iraq. I mean, we got attacked one time by rockets, and I had buddies that were getting attacked like every single day in Iraq, by rockets. So got out of the Air Force after 6 years, joined a civilian police agency in Greater Seattle, the Linwood Police Department, and started becoming a police officer and loving life and really feeling like I was making a difference in the community. transferred to Kennewick, which is in Eastern Washington. It's where both my wife and I are from. And within a short time, I'm a child crime detective. And it was those stories, those little Susie and little Johnny stories that really bothered me. That I really struggled with, and there were times where it was almost like my check engine light was flashing, like in our cars, but I wasn't. Even though I understood that something was up, I wasn't totally grasping it. I was reading a Cabbage Patch Kids book to my girls one night, and I started to cry. And I'm not afraid of showing emotions, but over Cabbage Patch Kids, I mean, like, come on. And it was shortly after that that I had a really large anxiety attack. Felt like a heart attack. Called the ambulance. Kind of sat on the floor, told my wife goodbye. And it was in that process where I really understood what anxiety was and unresolved stress and how it shows up in our bodies and the consequences of not dealing with it. And the consequences for me was after my second really large anxiety attack, I had intrusive images of me killing myself. And I was scared. I was really scared because, as a police officer, I would go out to come around folks that are in crisis like that and to try to connect them with our kind of our mental health emergency room, if you will, in our region. And now I was one of them. And I hate those words of us and them, but we do that, I think, in life because it makes us feel a little bit safer. If the people that are having the problems can be them instead of us, it kind of insulates us from being susceptible to whatever crisis they have going on. And so I was one of them now. And it was really tough for me to muster up the courage to talk to someone, to tell someone what was going on, because I was certain I was crazy. I was certain they're going to take away your livelihood. Maybe your wife's going to leave you. I don't know. I mean, all these thoughts, and I think this is pretty common for us as humans, where we have these negative self thoughts just recycle through our mind. And I think of it as like recycling garbage. It's not going to turn into a usable product, right? I mean, recycled garbage ends up being garbage after it's done, right? But I'm recycling these thoughts around. Thankfully, I got the courage to tell my mom, and she had me tell my wife. And my wife encouraged me to connect with a counselor that I knew and trusted. And so that began a lot of hard work of letting a counselor put me on medication and journaling and coloring and being on a sleep hygiene, just doing a lot of things. And I I, I resolved that then. So that was 2010, and I got to a really good spot probably about 2014 or so, and life was great until it wasn't. Somewhere in there, I became a supervisor. And so the scenes that bothered me the most were death scenes and child abuse cases. And I'm dealing with those again. And in the midst here, there's more flat check engine lights that are coming on, like me yelling at my kids. My two, I have four daughters, and two of them would be fighting, and one would hit the other one, and I'd blow up at them. Nobody touches my girls. And that's what I thought I was teaching them was like, if someone touches you, daddy's coming. What I was teaching them was that dad was big and scary because I'm yelling at them, right? I'm this big guy, and they're these little ladies with tender hearts. So, I mean, my wife and I are working through that. Hey, you can't be yelling at the kids. Yeah, I know I can't be yelling at the kids. And on the most part, got better at a lot of those things. But I don't know about you, but during COVID, just everything that went on during COVID, from just all of the divisiveness there, the divisiveness of a presidential election, the defund the police. I felt personally attacked, even though I knew I was acting with character, even though I saw the people on my left and right that were serving with integrity. I was internalizing way too much stuff instead of just stepping outside of my own skin and my own uniform and looking at it objectively and processing it in that way. I was processing it internally of are you bad? Are you doing something wrong? Yeah, and again, it just fed right into that narrative, that recycled garbage of I'm a bad dad, I'm a bad husband, I'm not a good enough of a police officer. I was on the SWAT team for a while, so I'm not a good enough of a SWAT cop. And I share that because I think that's pretty normal. At least when I talk with my friends, whether they were veterans or not veterans, whether they were somewhere in the first responder community or not, uh, I I think that's pretty common for us as humans to beat ourselves up because we're fully aware of our failures. We're fully aware of the things where we're not measuring up. And and so this last summer, I felt it mounting up again. I'd started compensating with alcohol probably around 2020. So here's the funny thing. Like I didn't drink alcohol through high school, through college. My parents would let me have a taste. And so there was no mystery. Like if I said, "Hey, Dad, I want to have some wine," he'd let me have a little bit of wine. If, "Dad, I want to taste beer," he'd let me have some beer. "Dad, I want to taste Kahlua." Yeah, here you go. And so I never used it, even through the military. I mean, I'd sit there and have a beer or something like that, but I just didn't, I wasn't abusing it. And through COVID, I started, man, if I wasn't working that day, I'd drink and I would start at whatever time lunchtime was. So if you can squeeze a sandwich in at 10:45 in the morning, that counts as lunch. You got to start drinking alcohol. And my wife had finally said something to me. She's like, "Hey, babe, you think you need to give alcohol a break?" And I was like, "Do you want to be my wife or do you want to be my mom?" The human I trust most in this world, who has stood by my side through Iraq, through Korea, through the SWAT team and child abuse cases, all this stuff. I pretty much tell her to shut up. And that's really the message I was sending to her. And it was shortly after that that I just spiraled again and the intrusive thoughts of me killing myself returned. And the second go around, and I say second, meaning 2010 being the first, I was just like, I'm not screwing with this. Like, I don't care whether I do this job anymore. I have to be a husband. I have to be a father. I have to fix these things. And so checked myself into a PTSD recovery center in Salt Lake City that I knew of, had some friends that had gone there, and started doing the really hard work. And I would love to say that it was unicorns and candy canes and leprechauns there, but it wasn't. It was like grueling work. One day I totally lost my shit on my counselor. She was super solid. I was just not happy. Another day I almost walked up to the owner of the place. He took us out for ice cream. We're in Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm not Mormon. And if anyone's listening, Mormon, rock on, lots of friends. But they don't drink a lot of alcohol. What they do when they decide to get naughty is they go to ice cream parlors. So this was an ice cream parlor in outer Salt Lake City. It was a Wednesday night and it was packed. Literally line out the door. And we got a whole bunch of guys and gals with PTSD that are showing up and to a crowded place, right? Like, and this, it was a bad recipe. And I almost lost it on the owner, and I was getting ready to march over and potentially get physical. I don't know. I hadn't thought through it that much. And thankfully, my mentor, who was a Marine, he grabs me and he's like, "What's up, dude?" And I give him a mouthful. And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, you're not going to say that to the owner. Like, let's go over to the car. Let's just leave, you know?" But I'm happy with everything that happened there, even the hard work, even the really tough stuff. Because it caused me to eventually have a breakthrough and start to really explore kind of the baggage that I'd been carrying around. And yes, death scenes and child abuse stuff bothered me, but there was so much more going on from my time in the military, from my time before the military, just growing up. And I had a relatively good childhood, but and there was some stuff when I was 8 that happened that really laid some foundation for some stuck points that were really tripping me up in life. And when we're not even aware of that stuff, when it's just in our peripheral vision, and you're constantly getting tripped up over it, it's really hindering because if you don't realize it, right? It's kind of like if you have a problem with your car and you don't realize that putting apple juice in the gas tank is going to cause a problem and you keep putting apple juice in the gas tank, you can't fix it because you don't even know about it. And that was really some of my experience with that. So got out of inpatient. I checked into what they call intensive outpatient therapy, where you go for like 9 hours a week, a few 3 hour sessions, and continue doing the work. And it was somewhere in that point that I finally made the decision, hey, I need to retire from law enforcement. Like I need to be done with this thing. It's been great. Love the career, love my military time. I miss aspects of both. And it's time for something new. And so in very beginning of November, I retired and I'm kind of like a stay-at-home dad and stay-at-home husband now, right? Where I'm cooking meals and washing our laundry and really just trying to continue understanding my brain and body more so that I can continue in this healing process.
So many incredible, incredible points that you made in your story. I actually had to take some notes here so that I wouldn't forget the things that I wanted to hit on. But the first thing that stood out to me, in really no particular order, I guess, is that we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
You talked about how you were yelling at your daughters and how at the time you thought that you were just teaching them to not be treated a certain way and that I won't put up with this. And I can't imagine how many other parents can relate to that. I think this was a huge style of parenting in like the 90s because that's just how a lot of parents, even today, that's just how a lot of parents parent their children, and not out of the thought process of I'm angry at you and I want to appear as a big scary person, but a lot of people as parents don't think of it from the child's perspective. And I even have to check myself as a parent sometimes of, my daughter's 2 years old, and there's just certain things that toddlers do because they're toddlers. They're not
Sure.
trying to, be an asshole or be, they're not trying to ruin my day. Right. But that's just, they don't know what they don't know
Yeah.
because they're still learning and it's their first time living on this planet too. And so that really resonated with me when you're saying, no, I was yelling at my daughters, but it was really something else. But it's almost like we make up this story in our mind to justify what we're doing to make it an okay thing. But there's so much more than that. There's so many layers to it. So I really appreciate that you brought that up. And I remember when we first talked outside of this podcast recording, you brought up that story to me and it resonated then too. Because I think that that's something that so many people can relate to, just thinking they're doing the best they can. Meanwhile, a child is like, no, my mom or my dad is yelling at me. What's going on?
Yeah.
And some of those things really stick with kids. And I think as a parent, that is something that is really hard, at least for me to deal with, is like, is there something that I'm going to do as a parent that my child is going to come back later in life and say, oh, I had a bad childhood or a bad moment in childhood because of this? And so I don't know if that's something that you can relate to as well. If you ever really internalize like the things that you did as a parent, I know you talked about internalizing things as a police officer during COVID and taking a lot of that stuff personally, but did you ever internalize the actions within your household that were really just stemming from things that you needed to deal with?
Yeah. Oh, completely. Yeah. I have two adult daughters, almost a third here very soon. And as that's where it's probably been the biggest impact for me is as I've watched them leave the house and as I see them navigating life and I pick up on things that I did not help. I
Mm,
pick up on things that they are now having to navigate and I could have done better. Now that's where grace has to come in, I think,
yeah.
because if we're evil, if you're going into it and you're like, I don't give a damn, I want to screw my kid up, well, then yes, feel bad, feel really bad. But for the rest of us, and like pretty much all the people I know, we're doing the best we can with what we have, and we're gonna screw up. There it is. We're all gonna screw up on some level. I hope not to screw up the same way over and over again. I hope that even in my screw ups, hopefully through humility, and the one thing I did well through that was I was not afraid to say I'm sorry. So
Mm,
when I yelled at my kids, whether my kids were 2, whether they were 15 or whether they were 23, I wasn't afraid to look them in the eye and say, "Hey, like especially if it was something that they did wrong. Hey, what you did wasn't right, but right now I need to address what I did that wasn't right."
mm,
I yelled at you just now, and that wasn't right the way I spoke to you. One of our family core values is communication, and I wasn't living by that. Will you please forgive me for the way I was acting? And so my girls got good at forgiving. I know that one of the things they brought up to me, I had my oldest daughter on the podcast, I don't know, about a year and a half ago, and she brought up the fact that it meant a lot that you apologize, Dad. The thing that was tough is when you are apologizing 2 days later for the same thing. Now you yelled again. And that's, if I could jump in that time machine and go back, I would really love to be able to do that. I can't. So now moving forward, I'm just doing my best to support my girls as they kind of, I don't want to say normalize in life, but as they navigate life
yeah.
with some of the baggage that I created for them. So
Yeah. Yeah. You talked about family core values. Can you expound a little bit more on that? Because that's not something that I typically hear
yeah.
from families. So I'm interested.
So the Air Force kind of did this for me. In the Air Force, integrity first, service before self, excellence in all you do. Those are the three core values, unless they've changed them. Uh, and I was at a training base for the first 2 years. So everyone goes through Lackland Air Force Base. That's the gateway of the Air Force. All basic training happens there. And then I stayed there as permanent party, and then eventually became an instructor there for a bit. And so those core values were constantly being spoken of. Some people in some military services, maybe you hear something in basic training, and maybe your tech school or your, was it called, A school for the Navy, and then you never hear it again when you get into the active duty force. That wasn't my experience. Both being in a training base and then being security forces, those core values were consistently drilled into me. I feel like the entire 6 years I was in. And so then when I got out, I kind of struggled because even joining a police department that was paramilitary, they didn't have that same culture of having these core values that we all agree upon and that we come together with and that we live by. And I mean, it literally changed the way I would live. Like, you go into the bathroom and there's paper towels all over the floor. And I would sit there and think to myself, integrity first. Those aren't my paper towels, but they need to get picked up. And so I would pick them up and throw them away. And so at some point, my wife and I, it was probably 2007, 2008, we're out on a date together. And that's another discipline that her and I try to exercise, is we try to go on dates regularly. And we're talking about core values. And we decided, hey, let's come up with family core values. So at first, her and I came up with them. And then we realized, hold the phone. If we can include the kids, if we can let our girls, and I think at the time we had three girls at the time. If we can include our girls in writing these, the ownership is going to go through the roof. The accountability is going to go through the roof. And so before we told them what they were going to be, I think we maybe gave them a sheet of kind of core values, and we had them look over them, or maybe we just asked them what's important. And they didn't say communication, they said talking. And they didn't say integrity, they said telling the truth. And so we allowed them to help write our family core values. And we don't use them like we used to. I mean, when our girls were young, we were using these constantly to praise them, to discipline them, I mean, just everything. And so our family core values that they came up with was family, love, integrity, and communication. And on some level, we were able to pretty much wrap everything that we were doing as a family into those four core values. We came up with shirts that had the core values written on them, and so yeah, it kind of helped, I think, with that transition. At least it helped me transitioning out of the military and into the civilian world, to have something similar that my team, my tribe, was living by.
Yeah, that's incredible. Family meetings for my family growing up were always kind of like a weird thing because it wasn't involvement of the kids. It was just kind of like parents saying, "This is what we told you," and you didn't listen. And in family meetings when I was a child, I always felt like I didn't have a voice, which ended up perpetuating this thought process into adulthood where I felt like my opinion didn't matter. And so I really love that you involved your kids in this process because no matter how young children are, I mean, they're very intelligent at every single stage and age. And so
Yes.
to have this thing that really creates accountability for the most part. And this is in families and organizations. I think having this shared value system or something to hold everyone accountable to say, hey, well, these are our values. Are we acting in these values? I think that that is huge, especially in a family unit of any type. Otherwise, what do you hold everyone to? Is it just one person's opinion? Is it the parent because I'm the parent? It really is, it's a family unit where everyone's opinion should matter. And so I really, really love that that is something that you and your family practice and not only just set them in place, but live by those values. Earlier, you talked about apologizing, but then also this open communication that I think is really important too in a family unit, especially when we can be humble enough as parents to not only apologize to our children, but to also hear our children when they're saying, hey, you did this and I don't appreciate it. Because it's not easy to hear that from anyone,
Yeah.
much less a child. And so there's so much respect that I have for you just in sharing that story. A few other notes that I took when you were sharing your initial story, you talked about your healing journey. And the one thing that I really appreciated is how you talked about how things were good and then they weren't good. I know the phrase healing isn't linear is like pounded into our heads across all these social media accounts that talk about healing. And it doesn't really give us that picture of what healing itself looks like. And so when you talk about like, I went through this healing process and then I was good for a little bit. And then when it came back up, when something came back up, it wasn't just like it was just a little blip and I just needed to go to therapy for a day and I'm good. Like you went through it the second time around. And it really paints this picture of it's okay if you have to go back to therapy. It doesn't mean that you're taking a step back in your life. It just means that this is what your journey is right now. And we tackle this as we deal with it right now. Also, just a reminder for me that the people that are helping, the people that are going through trauma, are also usually going through their own trauma or going through their own just life circumstances in general. It's very hard, I think, these days to find a first responder or someone working in the mental health field or in the military that isn't dealing with their own baggage or trauma or just life stuff in general. And so a really, really great reminder there. What do you think for you was the key thing that really kept you going back to seeking help rather than just throwing in the towel and giving up?
I'd seen the positive impact of letting my peers, my trained peers, support me, and in letting trained medical doctors and therapists treat me. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I was scared to death back in 2010. I mean, like I was certain I was crazy. I'd lost my mind, and I was very closed off to medication, to yoga, to meditating, to I mean, I had so many I don't do that, right? I mean, I was a SWAT cop, right? Like I was a gang detective. I was a tough guy. And when I submitted to my doctor and to my therapist, who I trusted both of them, and I got better, right? So I mean, I had my own experience, and then I also had the experiences of others. So this was even harder for me in 2023 here. I was in charge of our peer support program. Like I was the guy that was the supervisor that would send out officers, or I would go out myself if an officer went through a tough call. And that could be everything from a child death to a burning building to an officer involved shooting to an on the job injury by a peer. And I wasn't only doing that at my agency, I was organizing the training for our region for all law enforcement and a little bit for fire as well, right? So like I'm the guy. And I'm not saying that from a egotistical standpoint. I'm just saying, I mean, that's the role I was in. And so I was constantly helping other people. And I was actually talking with someone yesterday, and this phrase came up, the curse of comparison. I think sometimes we don't get help because we're comparing ourselves to other people. Well, look at her. She has it worse than I do. So I'm okay, right? Look at him. He's really got it. Like even the alcohol piece, I wouldn't drink during the week. So I didn't have a problem. But then Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, or God forbid it was a 3-day weekend, then it was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'm drinking 5, 10, 15 shots of tequila, right? And my wife is starting to have some animosity towards me, and good, she should have, because I'm checked out. I mean, like I'm conscious I'm a really nice alcoholic because I'm hugging, I'm loving, but I can't drive. And so she has to, and it wasn't even about her not drinking, but she could really care less about the alcohol. but she had to not drink. She had to be ready to support our girls. And so I think all of that, that whole recipe is what caused me to kind of almost be in a readiness to ask for help. And I share this with people because of my own experience. Hey, man, here's the deal. Think about this for a second. Uh, if you injure your body, are you going to go to your physical therapist and be like, "Hey, I don't want any of that electro stim. Hey, none of that ice for me. Don't be ice in my body. Hey, you know those one exercises? I'm not going to let you do that. But other than that, you can fix me." No, you're going to go to your physical therapist if you've injured your body, and you're going to be like, "Tell me what to do. Like, how do I get better?" And then you're going to listen to them, even if it's hard, even if it hurts. But for some reason, we put our mental health in differently than our physical health. We have these in like these two different categories, and we don't look at them the same. And so a lot of us walk into, if we even walk into a conversation with a therapist, with a counselor, we walk in with all of these do's and don'ts, all of these limits and boundaries. And boundaries are good in life, but if you have a trusted therapist, man, it's time to submit. It is time to walk in there and look at them and just be like, how do I get better? Like, you're my coach. Coach me. And so I'm really thankful for that. I'm thankful that here in 2023 that I had all of that because when it was about 2:30 in the morning when I almost had an anxiety attack, and it was going to be the first one in like 14 years or 13 years. And I instantly had the intrusive images again of me killing myself. And I was just like, nope. Grab my phone, message my doctor. I'm like, I need you to put me on leave. I need more help. And got into a counselor that I'd been seeing right after that. So I don't know. That's the constant encouragement I'm trying to move other people towards is why would you not include something in your options? And
Yeah.
include inpatient therapy. Maybe you'll never need it. Not everyone needs to go to that, and that's totally okay. But like, be willing to go because maybe that's going to be really the thing that saves your life.
And it sounds like you had support too around you. I mean, you said you were able to text your job and say put me on leave. Were they supportive of you getting the help that you needed?
So they were, but they don't have to be. And I want folks to know this. I don't know so much within the military world, but I can say this for public sector. So, and I think it's actually in Washington state, this is for most jobs. If your doctor puts you on leave, medical leave, there's nothing your employer can say about it. Now, your doctor has to provide a doctor's note. You have to be under their care. They have to re-communicate. It isn't just this forever, thing. But like when my doctor gave me a note, it said, Chris is under my medical care and he is currently not fit to report to duty for the next 30 days. That's all it said. Now, I trusted a number of the leaders in my organization. So when I reached out to send them that doctor's note, I chose to give them a little bit more. I chose to say, hey, I'm struggling. I'm struggling again like I was in 2010. Um, I need to get some things figured out here. But you don't have to. And that's, I know that there's a lot of people with fear over that. And some, it's maybe just a fear of the unknown. In other cases, it's really grounded fear in that they have leaders that are not, I'm not even going to call them leaders. They have managers and supervisors that are not going to have their back. Managers and supervisors that don't understand mental injury and are not ready to support them in the healing process.
Yeah, I think that's something that comes up in the military community a lot is still trying to move past that stigma and how much information does someone give without that information being used against them, whether it being spread out to people it shouldn't be spread out to, or someone not taking them seriously, because that is, I would say, a major issue, at least where I came from the military, is if someone just comes in with a note from a doctor that says, hey, they're not fit, then, rumors start to fly. And, maybe someone's like, oh, they're just trying to get out of duty. And there's still this stigma that very much exists in the military of, are you malingering or are you actually dealing with something? Because people still have an image in their mind that if you are mentally ill, quote unquote, mentally ill, that you look like you're falling apart. And so I've shared this in my own story before. I really struggled with high functioning anxiety when I was active duty. And even to this day, I still struggle with it, but it was probably at its worst when I was active duty. And because I didn't look like I was falling apart. So this is where you
Yes.
talked about the physical and the mental, right? It, no one can see my brain. So no one knows what's going on in there. But what they see is the physical manifestation of whatever I allow to present. So for me, giving up on things, not completing things, getting so overwhelmed that I do all this work when it's exciting and then I quit because I'm overwhelmed. For me, that was detrimental. But a lot of times these things can manifest as, oh, that's a really good worker, but this person has anxiety. And so, yet the physical shows up, it does, but
Yes.
maybe not in the way that people think, like the movies where someone's on the ground falling apart and crying.
Yes.
So,
Most of the time it doesn't. Well, I mean, I can't say most of the time because now I'm speaking in really broad terms.
yeah.
I had a number of peers. So again, I'm in charge of the peer support team. After I got back from the PTSD recovery center, I had some of the peers meet with me for coffee and apologize.
Mm.
Hey, Chris, sorry we didn't have your back. We didn't see it. I'm like, you didn't see it. I didn't see it. I was totally justifying my alcohol use. I almost avoided a breathing stoppage where someone is having CPR done on because I didn't want to see a dead body. No one knew I almost avoided it, right? Because I went. I had a 14-year-old child abuse case that I was filling in for one of my guys at one of the middle schools, and I took that report and sent it off, and then I and got her in CPS custody and all that kind of stuff. And then I went home that day. Well, no one knows why I went home. Well, I went home because I was sobbing, right? Like, so that's the thing is we can't we can't judge things based on what we think it's supposed to look like. Because even within folks that are struggling with anxiety, depression, getting into other mental health injuries from bipolar disorder to other things, it shows itself differently. Much like the physical body, sometimes physical injuries, doctors don't concur on what's wrong with the patient. They have to talk about it. They have to explore. They have to try one thing and it doesn't work. So they try another thing. Well, the same is true with our minds. There's so much that we aren't seeing that, I've heard things like what you just said with, people are concerned. What is it again? Malingering. People are concerned that people are malingering. Here's the deal. So what? So what, military leaders? Think about this for a second. Think about this. If you radically support them, now I'm not talking about just giving them whatever they want. I'm not talking about, oh yeah, here's some candy canes and you go play Candyland. No, you support them. You get them connected to science-based resources that are aimed at healing the brain. You're going to have a few people sneak through the cracks that are just being lazy. My guess is the majority are actually having things going on, and the rest, the morale in your unit is going to go through the roof. Not because you're giving people an easy pass, but because you're supporting them in the healing process. And either they'll go off and get healed and come back to work ready to go. They'll go off and realize, hey, I can't do this anymore. And they'll go through a separation process. Or you're going to find out that they're a big liar. And then you can sit there and punish them. But my guess is from me talking to uh, chiefs in the fire service and the police service, my guess is what you're going to see is the overwhelming majority of the folks are have some kind of injury, are going to do the work to get better, and you're going to be communicating a message to everyone that hey, it's okay to not be okay. There's a process. You don't just get whatever you want. There's a process to go through. Just like if you broke your leg, I'm not going to let you decide how to heal that. Nope, we're going to send you to the doctor. They're going to cast it. You're going to go to physical therapy when it's done. I don't know. I might be oversimplifying it, but I think we have to do something different than what we've been doing.
Yeah,
Continuing to do
absolutely.
the same thing isn't working.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think a lot of it goes back to kind of what we touched on earlier. People went through their own version of their own story. And so when someone else is coming up and they're saying, hey, I'm not okay, I'm dealing with this, I think a lot of leaders in the military, from my experience and from what I saw, they were dealing with their own shit. And they were afraid to seek help, or they were afraid to heal, or whatever it is for each individual person. And so they almost project that onto the people that they're leading. Like, if I can't seek help, if I have to deal with alcoholism's rampant in the military in general, but in the Navy, I truly believe that just about every single person that I served with was dealing with some kind of internal struggle.
Yeah.
And it's hard for someone to support someone, when they're already dealing with their own problems, because I think most people are inherently pretty selfish when it comes to, I'm dealing with my stuff and I have to deal with my stuff. And then on top of that, I have to deal with all the military stuff, and I have to deal with all the, the things that might get me fired from my job. It's like that hierarchy, right? The survival stuff first, and then, oh, and by the way, now I have to also support someone else. I think for a lot of people that might just seem like extra, I hear a lot of times, well, I went through this and I made through this, so you can do that too. And so that comparison piece that you talked about too, I mean, it's like this never ending cycle that has to be broken somehow.
Yeah. Just because you received poor support from your leadership doesn't mean we should perpetuate that. I
Right.
had a leader tell me that one time in reference to someone who was trying to get some extended leave because of losing a family member. And per policy, we didn't have to give it to him. And I was like, he has it on the books. Let's give it to him. Like,
Yeah.
it's not going to hurt anything. All it's going to do is improve morale and support this person. And that was the response was, well, when my
Mm-hmm.
father or mother, I can't even remember the relationship, died, I was given 2 days off work and ordered to come back. I'm like, well, just because people were jerks to you don't mean we should keep being jerks.
And
Let's
how did
fix
that make you
this.
feel?
Let's fix
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. It's a culture thing at the end of the day.
It
It's
is. And
a
we can
humbling
change.
thing.
We can
Yeah.
change culture. It's
Yeah.
Simon Sinek talks about future leaders in one of his talks, and he points out the fact that, hey, you're the leader now, right? You have the opportunity to lead differently, to lead well, to care about your folks. We have to hold them accountable. We got to get the mission done. However, can we start by taking care of our folks
Mm.
and expect them to get the mission done versus let's expect them to get the mission done. And if there's time, then we'll do some things for some health and morale and welfare type things. Now
Yeah.
let's just start by taking care of them and let's get the mission done together.
Yeah. And I want to point out too, though, that, as simple as it sounds, it might not be always met with open arms from people. It might be really difficult in the beginning because people don't like change,
100%.
especially those people who are like, well, I went through this, so we're going to continue this. And so, there's not always a lot of support for that person that wants to come in and be like, you know what, I'm going to do things differently and I'm going to treat people better. I think, especially when you look at the higher enlisted leadership in the Navy specifically, a lot of people hit that E7 rank and they're like, oh, I'm going to be the change. But then this whole group of people that have, they're salty because they've been doing it this way for so long and tradition and all these things, they are like, no, this is how we do it. And I don't know. I never hit E7. So I don't know exactly, what conversations they're having. But, I saw a lot of people make it through the military with really good intentions, and they wanted to be that change, and they wanted so badly to be that person that was better, and it was so difficult for them to do. And so I just wanted to talk about that fact that being the change maker is not always easy.
Not at all, Rachel. That's a really good point. And I teach a leadership class for the state. And what I oftentimes will say to supervisors, young supervisors, is focus on what you do have control over, right? Like if you're wanting to have this sweeping change for your whole organization and it's just overwhelming, you're like, I can't do that. Okay, well then just change it for the five people that you're responsible for. Make it just a little bit better for them. And hopefully it's going to catch. Hopefully that's going to get contagious and there's going to be evidence of it being done better. And then people are going to start asking, hey, what are you doing? Your folks have a really good attitude. What's going on? And you get the opportunity to share, well, this is what we're doing as a team. And yeah, I think focusing on what we have control over is probably one of the bigger life lessons that I've learned over the years.
Yeah, that's great advice, especially when we're looking at the big organization or something as large as the DoD or the military. And, knowing that there's so many things to change, where do we start? And this is probably something that military leaders rack their brains over all the time, is there's all these things. And I think that's why we see so many surface level changes, because it's always like, well, maybe if we change a hair policy or a uniform policy, or maybe if we modernize this, or, right now, I think they're focusing a lot on more technology and trying to attract, tech into the military. And this is how we make it better without like digging into the slices of what actually needs to be changed and saying, hey, let's start with this tiny little change that's going to make a difference. That's where that individual responsibility comes in with unit leaders and people who are actually in the workspaces, that the higher up people that are leading the show, they're never going to see that stuff because they're not in it every single day. And so that's
100%.
really great advice. You change the lives of 5 people. Just start with 5, and then just continue to set these small digestible goals of what can I do to make today better for everyone in the workplace, or what can I do just to boost morale for one person today. And it's incredible what a difference those small little changes really make. They really do make waves.
Yeah.
So
And I think it's as simple as showing up to work. Let's say you are a supervisor, you're an E5, you're an E6, you have however many people that are reporting to you. Maybe you're an E4 and you have people reporting to you. And and you show up and you're like, "Hey, how you doing, Rachel? How's your daughter?" Right? And
mm,
then I learn your daughter's name. And so tomorrow I'm going to ask you how your daughter is by her name, or maybe in a week I am. But just like genuinely care. See your employees as, and I see your employees. I don't mean that to sound possessive, but see your employees as people you are responsible for them, and that you genuinely care about them, and then act that way. They still have to get the job done. Like, this is not this mamby-pamby soft, new age, let's all hug and sing kumbaya. No, it's just giving a damn about people. The,
right.
the military leaders, I remember one of them, Sergeant Moe. He was a tech sergeant, so he was an E6 in the Air Force. And he was my sergeant when I went to Korea. And I showed up and he gave a damn about us. He worked our butts off. He had previously been in the 820th, which was is supposed to be similar to like the 82nd Airborne, but it's a Air Force Security Forces version of it where literally they airdrop into places and whatnot. And I mean, it's a high speed unit out of Moody Air Force Base. And I don't even know if it's called that anymore. So if I'm using old terms, people forgive me. And but he was hardcore, and we were doing ruck marches, and we were the only flight that was doing ruck marches in Korea, and we're doing these ruck marches, and but we all loved him because he cared about us, and
Mm,
you could tell that he cared about us as people, right? And so if you just start with that, just care about your people. Now, that's going to go some directions, right? Because if you care about your people and they start bringing up their problems to you, that's good. General Colin Powell talks about that in one of his talks. There's this reporter that asks him, "What's the greatest thing you can tell us about leadership?" And without even thinking for a second, he goes, "Trust."
mm,
And then he shares a story. And at the end of the story, he pretty much says that if your people stop bringing you their problems, there's a problem with your leadership, right? Because if you care about them, they're going to trust you and they're going to bring you their problems. And that's how you know that you're doing it right, because they trust you to do that. So, yeah, it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to come up with some new program or acronym or any of that. Just start with caring about your folks.
right. And
Yeah.
I mean, for the people that are program or checklist oriented or whatever, I mean, there's so much information out there in the world of leadership. And one of the things I wish the military would invest in is bringing in quality leadership trainers
Yes.
to teach people, instead of just having the E4 or the E5 teach a class based off of a PowerPoint that someone threw together in some office in the military or the DoD. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just that's not teaching leadership. I would hope to see that change someday. But so many incredible nuggets that you shared, that I hope whoever's listening, if you are active duty and you're one of those people that listens, to take gold nuggets back to the workplace. I really hope that you listen to this and you implement what Chris is sharing here, because I mean, these things will make such a huge difference in the lives of the people around you in your workplace. Chris, what are you up to these days?
Yeah, so I have the podcast, Gravity podcast. Again, I'm just bringing on first responder and military guests, trying to talk about different wellness, I don't want to say initiatives, but maybe disciplines or habits. I have a business with a similar name, Gravity Consulting and Training, and I'm teaching wellness and leadership and safety principles I'm open to nationwide, but really I'm focusing on my general area here, and I'm targeting the business community. But because of my recent retirement from law enforcement, I have contracts with different law enforcement entities as well. And yeah, just trying to take these lessons, these stories. I mean, that's the reality. If you've been in the military for a while, you have stories. You have stories about how it was done amazing. I hope. I hope you have some of those stories. And you have stories how it was done really wrong sometimes. And those are powerful stories when you can take that and think about, hey, how can this benefit the eye doctor down the road? How can I put this into a teachable lesson for them? It's powerful. People like hearing stories from the military and hearing how they can apply that in their daily life. So that's what I'm trying to do. And then again, I'm a stay-at-home dad and husband, and I dehydrate food. I do laundry. I vacuum the floor. In fact, I think that's what I'm going to be doing here in a little bit. So, and I'm absolutely loving it. I'm absolutely loving it. I'm
That's
also
awesome.
pretty outspoken. Rachel, you've allowed me to come on here. I'm on social media trying to talk about wellness, and that gives other people that are kind of like, man, I need to get some kind of help, but I don't know
Mhm.
what. It kind of opens the door for them to message me. And sometimes I know them, they're people I know, sometimes they're total strangers. And I don't have the answers. I'm not a therapist, but I know a lot of places that have the answers. And so that's typically what I'm doing, is just pushing people in the direction of resources so that they can start the process of being their best selves.
That's awesome. How can we find you and how can we best support you?
Yeah, so on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, that Gravity Podcast is the tag that will get you to those accounts. My website is gravityct.com. The CT stands for consulting and training. People can get on there. My email is chris@gravityct.com. So any of those ways are ways that people can get a hold of me and really supporting me. I mean, yeah, if someone needs leadership content, wellness content, I'd be more than happy to teach those classes, whether it's over Zoom or coming directly to people's sites. But really, us all having these conversations. I mean, that's the bigger mission, right? Is that people don't have to be in the dark place that I was at. I'm hoping people know the resources ahead of time so that if they start to go into a season of life, and I think they will at some point, where it's like, man, this is tough. I just want them to be more aware of the resources. I don't want them to feel the fear that I felt.
Mm,
And so the way you can support me is by telling your own story and by talking with your friends. And you don't need to direct them towards me, but just direct them towards this whole conversation that a lot of us are trying to have to increase awareness and let people know how they can get help.
I love that. And are there any last words or pieces of advice that you want to leave the listeners with today to wrap us up?
Yeah, be patient with yourself and give yourself a whole bunch of grace. Those are the things I struggle with. I am doing the work, and sometimes the work of healing, whether it's a physical portion of our body or our minds, it takes time. If it took you 6 years or 10 years or 20 years to get injured, guess what? It's maybe going to take just as much time to totally heal up. So be patient, and then you got to forgive yourself. I know a lot of friends that are good at forgiving other people, but they're constantly beating themselves up for their shortcomings. So yeah, change your behavior. Like, don't use it as an excuse, but forgive yourself and move forward.
Thank you for taking the time to listen in today. With your support, we are able to increase awareness of the mental health issues affecting service members and veterans today, with the goal of creating positive change. If you got value from this episode, please take 30 seconds to subscribe and share this episode within your own network. Until next time, remember, your story matters, your mental health matters, and your story doesn't end here.